Hi, all. Welcome to You Own It with Jerry Thompson. This is episode 7, and this is I call this our holiday episode. It's between Thanksgiving and Christmas right now in Buffalo. We have a nice fresh coat of snow. If you watched the Bills game the other night, you saw our Buffalo Bills do a number on the San Francisco 49ers in the snow. So it's a beautiful time of year to be here in Buffalo. And let's talk a little bit about get into a little more of the weeds. If you listen to episode 1 through 6, I've given you basically an outline on how to buy, how to sell, how to win multiple offers, the kind of the big picture stuff. How's the transaction? What do you do? How do you close the house after you buy it? Now let's start getting into the weeds as we go through some of these episodes, a little bit individual items. And today I want to try to help you as buyers or sellers or agents understand the mysteries of the escalation clause. And let's start by defining what an escalation clause is. So when you hear real estate people talk about, oh, you can do an escalation clause, or the seller doesn't want escalation clauses, or what does that mean to you? Well, an escalation clause is a paragraph, an addendum, or written statement added to your purchase offer contract that has basically, it says the following, and I'm going to use $200,000 as an example. Let's say there is a house on the market for $200,000, and you want to bid up to $260,000 on it, but you don't want to go right away to $260,000. An escalation clause allows you to say, I am making you an offer of $200,000. I will escalate above and beyond any other offer you have, meaning if they get an offer for $220,000, you'll beat that offer by an escalation amount. Let's say it's $3,000 for this example, all the way up to a maximum purchase price. So fundamentally, the clause says the following thing. I will offer you $200,000. I will beat the next highest offer by $3,000 up to a maximum purchase price of $250,000, provided you provide me the documentation to prove that I was going to accelerate to that point. That is what's called an escalation clause. And what that does for you as a buyer is it gives you a little bit of the peace of mind of knowing that you're not just going to $250,000. There's another buyer out there that's right behind you, and you're just beating them. So escalation clauses, though, have pros and cons. And they are often, as I always say, escalation clauses are the most difficult to navigate, confusing and complicated, and create the most argument amongst real estate professionals when you ask whether or not they like them or they don't. Some people love them, some people hate them. And the reason being is that they often are misused, they're often misunderstood, or missed. The 3 M's of escalation. Misused, misunderstood, missed. And by 3M, I don't mean the company that does the little, I think they invented the Post-it note, right? Was that 3M company? But there are always 3Ms with the escalation clause. Whenever you're thinking about using one, you need to know the pros. You also need to know the cons. The pros of an escalation clause. If you are a buyer of a home, oftentimes when you see a place, there may be multiple offers. And when you want to make a multiple offer, let's say you're competing against 8 different people, one of the most frustrating parts as a buyer is like, what am I going to offer? If I offer $265,000, am I beating everybody by $40,000? I don't want to overpay by $40,000. How do I do that? Voila, an escalation clause. You can submit an offer for $200,000, agree to beat the next highest by $5,000, and have the peace of mind in knowing that if you didn't do what you did, you wouldn't have gotten the property. That is the primary pro of an escalation clause. It also, in some circumstances, can be a pro in that you can win the house at a number that's lower than what you would pay for the maximum. Let's talk about the cons of an escalation clause. Let's first start with misused. One of the downsides to an escalation clause is that you fundamentally are telling the seller of a home what you're willing to pay. And even though you submit in an offer a written clause that says, I'm willing to pay this price, I will escalate by $5,000 over the next highest offer up to a maximum price, and I need documentation, which is the fourth part of a good escalation clause, of the proof of the other offer's existence before I escalate. Sellers doesn't have to share anything with you. It's their home. They can do what they want. So an escalation clause often can be misused against the buyer to their disadvantage. And let me give you an example of that. I had a situation a few weeks ago where I submitted an offer on a house and my buyer wanted to use an escalation clause. We submitted the escalation clause and I got a call from the listing agent that night and said, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is the seller who allowed escalation clauses likes your offer. You're in the strongest position to win. Your base price is barely ahead of the second place guy. So without escalating, we were winning. They told us that already. However, the dilemma I have is the seller saw what you're willing to pay and wants that. So what are you going to do? You have a dilemma. You can stick to your clause and say, this is what I submitted, and I'm not going to budge, or you can close and get the house. I've seen buyers decide both directions. In this specific circumstance I'm telling you, and I'm telling you under cons of an escalation clause, my client decided to stick to their guns. What happened is the seller then turned around, went to offer number 2, and said, hey, got this buyer 1. They've offered more than you already, and they're willing to escalate to this price. If you go to their escalation, we will take your offer. And as often can happen in today's market, when you are in this type of a strong seller's market in which buyers often can't dictate many terms, if you are the guy in the lead and you're able to close the transaction and you failed to do it, and buyer number 2 is called and they're said, hey, just want you to know you weren't winning. This other guy's opened the door for you to close the transaction. Buyer number 2 often, I like to say, the scariest creature in the world is the second place shunned buyer in a multiple offer situation getting the second bite at the house. There's nothing that stands in their way. If they've been let down and told they weren't getting it, then they're called back and said, maybe you have a chance, you just got to do this. Boom, a good one, good buyer, second place buyer will close that. Done, because they've usually lost several. And in that circumstance I told you about in Amherst, where it was misused, we were asked to accelerate. We didn't. My buyer stuck to their guns, and the second place guy did, and we lost. Frustrating, I know. But it can be misused against your buyer. The other thing that can happen is the seller can just review them and say, I know you're willing to pay this maximum price. We're not going to provide you the backup document. We want you to pay it. If you want to win my house, you have to pay it. Or sometimes they'll say, we don't want you to pay your maximum. Just pay $8,000 less than maximum. But we're not comfortable sharing the documentation. You as a buyer can put whatever you want in your contract proposal to a seller. Doesn't mean they're going to accept it. A seller can tell you as a buyer, I don't want you to do any of this. When you make your offer, doesn't mean you have to. It's not a contract till both parties agree. So what you as a buyer propose isn't the terms a seller has to live by. And what a seller suggests, so for example, when you see no escalation clauses, when a listing agent says a seller doesn't want to entertain escalation clauses, they're telling you up front what they want, but you don't have to do it. It may put you at a disadvantage, but you get to put what you want in your contract. Seller gets to put what they want in their response. And then the question is whether or not the two of you will meet. So one of the big cons in the escalation clauses is you are tipping your hand on your maximum price, and the seller often will misuse it against you. They'll take your momentum, they'll refuse to provide the information, and they'll flip it on you and use your maximum number. Right? The other thing is they can be misunderstood. So one is they're often misused against you. 2, they can be misunderstood. So if you were a seller of a home, you have to kind of walk in the seller's shoes. And let's say you had a $600,000 house and you said, I'm listening to offers, and you got 4 offers, and one offered $520, but escalated, beating the next highest by $2,000 all the way up to $620. Second one offered you $565. Third one offered you $575. And the fourth offer came in at $617. Who are you going to take? The guy that came in straight at $617 or the guy that came in at $520, accelerating to beat $617 by $2,000? The complication of the escalation, the complication in which the buyer presents themselves as saying, hey, I really want your house, but I'm only going to beat the next guy by a little bit, can be misunderstood as what I call nickel and dime in the real estate transaction. One of the things both buyers and sellers need to understand, whoever you enter into the contract with is the person you have to live with in acting on that contract for the next 60 to 90 days of your life. If one party believes the other party is going to nickel and dime them through the entire transaction, it's tough sledding. The one party, especially if they have other choices, who didn't do that. They just came in straightforward. I want it. I'm giving you $617. This other guy, we got to do the math and end up at $619. Is the $2,000 worth? The seller doesn't know the buyer. They only know what the buyer is presenting. They don't know that the person doing the escalation doesn't intend to insult. They don't know the person doing the escalation doesn't intend to nickel and dime. They just want surety of number two. They want know that there actually is another offer, that they're not overpaying by $50,000. Seller doesn't know that. So they can misunderstand who you are as a buyer. And misunderstanding leads to decisions that may not be the outcome that you may not want. So often escalation can be misused, maximizing you without documentation. Two, there can be misunderstood by a seller who believes that you're not sincere in your offer, and they can be missed. They're a clause that is tucked way back in at least in Erie County, Buffalo. Our standard bar association forms give us an opportunity to place an escalation clause on page 8, paragraph 20, or to do entirely separate addendum. If the escalation clause is on page 8, paragraph 20, not properly highlighted to the seller, if the seller is looking at 30 offers with their agent, your escalation clause, I've seen it, can be missed, can be overlooked, can be print was too small, it was tucked in too tight with the other paragraph. It's something that can't be seen. Then can be, and seller takes action without understanding that you're willing to do it because the communication from the buyer's agent side wasn't really clear that there was an escalation clause there. And I've gotten offers. I get offers all the time in multiple offer situations where the buyer's agent doesn't make the listing agent's job easy. And when you're looking at, trust me, when you're looking at 40 offers between 5 and 7 o'clock, you have a meeting with the seller at 7, and you're trying to checklist each one. What's the price? What's the deposit? Is there an inspection? What kind of financing? Do they have the pre-approval? When they want to close? Any additional documentation that's necessary? And you're flipping through 40 25-page offer documents trying to get every checkbox. It can be missed. Unless the buyer's agents clearly put a cover letter. Boom, escalation clause. If you're ever a buyer submitting, I don't care who your agent is, and you have an escalation clause in the contract, make sure they have like this big blinking red light front page to the contract. The listing agent cannot miss that says escalation clause in paragraph 20. That way it won't be missed, because the 3 big issues with escalation clause: misused by sellers agents who take advantage of you putting your cards on the table. Maybe not even misused. It's used. They're using it in their client's best interest. So misuse is maybe the wrong term, but misuse from your perspective as a buyer when you submit that escalation clause. Misunderstood, where a seller gets kind of insulted over it, and that wasn't what it was meant to be, and just missed. I can give you disaster story about escalation clauses that created conflict between 2 different parties. I told you my story in Amherst. We were asked to escalate. My buyer would not escalate without proof. Went to number 2, and we lost. I had success with one yesterday where we were asked to escalate. We got documentation in the morning. Everything came. There's 4 important parts of an escalation clause. These are crucial parts of an escalation clause. Any escalation clause that gets submitted needs these parts. 1, what's the base price? What's the first price you're starting with? 2, What's the escalating factor? How much you're going to beat the other offer by. 3, what is the maximum price you're willing to pay? And 4, what is the required documentation that you need before you'll escalate? That's on the buyer's side. That's what you need to have in when you propose an escalation clause. Now, as a buyer, I've always said, in today's market, because it's a seller's market, think like a seller. What are the pros and cons of an escalation clause to a seller? The pro of an escalation clause to the seller is that sometimes it gets more people off the fence. So if you have a house and you know you're hoping to get multiple offers, there may be buyers that are scared to offer, let's say on a $400,000 house, they think it might go for $465,000, but they don't know. And they don't want to offer $465,000 for fear that they'll offer $465,000 and the next highest buyer is $420,000. So sometimes allowing escalation clauses can get more buyers off the fence. And then by stacking up a few extra buyers, you escalate to a maximum value anyways. So the big pro for sellers is being more welcoming to the buyers having flexibility in the open market. The cons to the seller is it can leave, if you allow escalations and you treat them sincerely as the way you want to deal with that offer, you can leave significant, and I'm talking $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 on the table, for lack of a better description. I have seen scenarios where there's been 18 offers, and in those 18 offers, I'll give you a generic example just so that nobody can go, that was me, because this is made up. This is made up, but it's from historical context. 18 offers on a house for $400,000. Usually there's 2 that are terrible. There's always 2. If there's a lot of offers like that, there's always 2 people that still think they're going to buy it for list price. Then there's 16 left. There's 8 that are going to be on a $400,000 house between $415,000 and $435,000, let's say. Right? Now there's only 8 left. Then there can be 4 that are in the next tier, $440,000, $460,000. Now there's 4 left. And then you could get a $475,000, a $485,000, a $490,000, and a $530,000. $530,000 clearly won, right? By $40,000. $480,000 to $520,000 is 40. My numbers I might have gotten off, but let's say number 2 is $480,000, number 1 is $520,000. It's $40,000 win for the seller by not considering escalation clauses. Because if that buyer was allowed to use an escalation clause, or the seller was listening to them, they could have escalated by $5,000. And if your second place was $480,000 and the buyer was sticking to their guns, they would only pay $485,000. So sellers often don't want them because they can be less seller favorable when there's a gap. Not always, because the seller can turn it around anyways. If you have 18 offers, if the seller's got one that escalates to $520,000 and there's one at $480,000, you could tell the escalator, which I talked to you about, misused, tell the escalator they want $520,000 anyways. And if they don't want to pay it, go back to the second place guy and say, hey, I've got this guy that says you're going to escalate to this, but I'll tell you what, I'll take this from you, and still create a gap. Now, one of the problems with the 4 components of the escalation clause, often mishandled by buyers and agents themselves. Usually in an escalation clause, these are things that create a weak escalation clause. The starting price is too low. So if there's multiple offers, don't start the price too low. Start it somewhere where you're willing to pay, even if it doesn't escalate, no regrets. So let's say the price is $400. Make it start at $440. Don't start at $365. Sellers take that as a slight. If you start in 19th place and you want to escalate to first, you remember, treat it like it's like a horse race. There's a lot of horses you got to pass. If you start in last place, you have less lanes to get to the finish. Start in third and escalate past second and 1. You're in the Kentucky Derby, stretch run. That's what the escalator kicks you over. It not designed to be able to start in the last spot and then pass every other horse and win, every other prospective buyer and win. It's designed to get you up to start in third or fourth. And then as you turn to the stretch run, you zip by and you win the Kentucky Derby. Now in the next one, which I think is the Belmont and the Preakness, I'm not even sure, you run out of gas and you don't get to the finish line. That's what prevents everybody from winning the Triple Crown, I think. In any event, the That you want to escalate at don't start at the low. Don't start too low. Number 2, make sure you fit all 4 clauses. Make sure your escalator is enough money the seller doesn't construe you as nickeling, diming them. Beat the next highest by 5 or 10 grand. Don't beat the next highest by $100 or $1,000. Beat it by enough that the seller's personal offense to you using an escalation goes away. 5 grand usually does that. Maybe 10, right? And so the escalator, make it enough. Don't start too low. Make a good escalator. Make sure you put in the escalator your maximum cap and be prepared to go to it if you need to. I've had scenarios in multiple offers where an agent has submitted an escalator without a cap. And then you call and go, hey, we're asking you to escalate to 530. You had no maximum cap in there. We're presuming you wanted the house. And then they go, oh no, the buyer didn't realize they had to have a top number on it, be prepared to act on it, right? And then the 4th big important component that you want to make sure, and this is the one where this is the toughest question, you're asking for documentation of why you're escalating. That can be the page of the contract with the price, with page 1 and page 2, with the actual buyer's name blacked out. It's not really your business what the name of the buyer is. And professional realtors will not be giving you garbage. They're real numbers. They have a code of ethics, an obligation to deal honestly and fairly with you and not make up stuff. Now, we've gone all the way through that, and remember the con. If you've laid that out there, they can also respond and say, I'm not going to provide you that documentation. I want you to escalate anyways. And that's the big. And then if they say that to you, I want you to imagine this for a minute. Seeing a house on a Saturday, you love it. The deadline's Monday at 5, and there's going to be 14 offers. And it's a brick ranch house, kitchen's updated, finished basement. You're a big Bills fan, huge Josh Allen fan. It's got a custom Josh Allen mirror, finished basement bar rec room with a flat screen TV, Bills Mafia all over the place. And you love it. That's the house you want. And they're asking $220. There's 14 offers. You think it's going to sell at $320. You submit an offer that starts at a good number, $265, right? $270, gets you in the race, gets you in the stretch run, accelerates to $320 by $5,000 each. Your agent gets a call back. We think you're going to be able to win this thing. Your acceleration is so good. I've talked to my seller. They want $310. But we're not going to provide you a backup document. What are you going to do? It's not up to your agent. It's up to you. You get that house, the custom Josh Allen mirror bar, Becker bar, big flat screen TV with the finished basement, brick ranch, low maintenance, exactly what you've been looking for forever. Location that you've wanted. You've lost 12 offers. You can buy this one now for $310. Or you can take the chance that they're going to offer it to somebody else, but they're not going to abide by your escalation clause. And you've already told them you're going to pay $320 if they could prove a backup offer. So it's a really hard decision to make. So one of the things you have to be prepared for when you go into the escalation clause as a use in your offer is what you're going to do if they decide to call your bluff and say, nope, this is what we want. What are you going to do? It's a hard decision because I've had people say, no, we submitted an escalation and we want to live by the contract we submitted. Please do so. And I've had them win at a much lower number. And other people say that. And I've had the sellers and their agent react in a different fashion. And then we've lost because they've offered somebody else a chance. And that second place buyer is the tough buyer to beat when they know they would have lost, but now they're given a second life. But that's an escalation clause. So let me give you a quick bullet point summary. We'll wrap this up. Escalation clause is a clause in the contract that allows you to not offer your best right away. It allows you to offer a base price. When you offer that base price, get yourself in the horse race. Do not start last place. Get yourself in a spot where even if you got it, you'd be happy with the number. 200, offer to, if you think it's selling for 300, offer 275 to start. Right? Base price, good one. Escalator, how much are you going to beat the next guy by? Escalate enough that it's an incentive for the seller to not be outraged over the fact that you won't just automatically accelerate to your maximum price. Number 3, what's the highest you'll pay? Should be in the escalation clause. If you want to leave it blank, it's really not a valid escalation clause. You can. Maybe that's a secret way to avoid it, but it's not legitimate. You should have a maximum number. And then number 4, are you going to demand documentation on that escalation, and what sort of documentation is going to be there? When do you use escalation clauses in summary? You normally use them in 2 circumstances. Multiple offer, where you don't want to go to the mat. And the second, this is a nice little thing to keep in your back pocket in case you need it. You see a house on a Saturday, it doesn't have a deadline. They're asking $220,000. Submit it, start at $225 over list price and escalate to $250. It means the seller could consider negotiating with you anywhere in that range right away. And if they don't think they're going to come up with a second offer, you're offering them a range of opportunity. And one of the things I know in today's market is you do not win challenging the market over time. Most of the time, you do not win by sitting there watching a house waiting for it to come down to your price. Occasionally. Most of the time, you don't. And those are the only reasons to use an escalator. Multiple offer, or if you're trying to give the seller kind of a range of an opportunity to negotiate with you. And I wouldn't give them your max value. Then I'd give them a value and then a range of value you'd consider, because their agent could misuse it to your advantage. You have to think the way the seller's agent's going to think and the seller's going to think when they get your proposal. You have to think, how are they going to look at it? It's just like winning a multiple offer. Think what you need to do to outsmart all the other buyers and the seller and the seller's agent. Get yourself in the winning position. All escalations cover the 4 things. Use it at the right time. Use it when it's available and welcomed. And use it when you think that it won't be misunderstood. You think that it won't be misused. And you know it won't be missed because your agent is clearly highlighted in blinking red light. My contract has an escalation clause. As always, thank you so much for listening. Hopefully this is helpful to clarify some things about an escalation clause. It is not a simple clause to deal with, and it is something that you should tread lightly when you use it. If you use it well, you can be a big winner. If you use it poorly, you can be a big loser. So it's not something for both sides, seller and buyer side. So you need to understand the pros and cons before you make a decision in each one of those real estate transactions. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you own it. The decision is yours. Get an agent that gives you good advice, gives you the pros and cons on both sides of it, and then own it and make your own decision. Thanks so much. Appreciate you listening, and we'll see you at episode 8 next month. Thank you so much for tuning in to You Own It. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast apps, and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and greatest. All of our social channels are clickable in the show notes as well. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, c21jerry.com. There you'll find more info on me as well as my latest listings for all of Western New York. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, through any big decision, you own it.